everyone. This is our first expedition episode. My name is Jono, and we are going to be learning about the Bible together all through the summer in this segment. Now, today we saw in the skit how the group ended up lost, disoriented. They were stuck far away from where they were supposed to be. Now, if you've been lost before, you know how scary that can be. Happened to me when I was a kid. Now, one time I got lost when my mom and dad were in one store and my uncle and I were in another store right beside it in the mall. I must have been 5 years old or something like that. Now, I was probably bored following my uncle in that store or something because it was a fancy men's suit store with shirts and ties and other fancy business clothing. Getting really bored, I told my uncle, I'm going to go back to my mom and my dad, but my uncle told me to wait there with him, probably because he thought it was a bad idea to let a little kid like me be unsupervised in a busy mall. I totally didn't want to wait and stick around in that store with all the boring suits and ties and shirts and stuff, so I totally lied and told my uncle, oh, yeah, I can see my parents right outside. I'm going to go to them. That was totally not true. I couldn't see them. I knew they were next door, and I thought it would be easy to find them and get to them, and so I lied and told him that I would find them right away. I left the store, I went next door to the store beside it, and I ran up to my parents, but they weren't my parents. My parents were actually in the store on the other side, and the people I ran up to were just two people who looked like my parents. And if you've ever called somebody mommy and daddy who aren't your parents, you know how embarrassing that is. So it freaked me out. I quickly ran back to the suit store to find my uncle, but he was gone. He wasn't in the suit store anymore. So I started panicking because my parents weren't in the store where they were supposed to be. My uncle wasn't in the store where he was supposed to be either, and everyone I saw around me were strangers. They weren't my family, and it freaked me out even more. And that's the thing about panicking. It stops you from thinking properly. I started running in random directions, running in random stores, trying to find my family. Sobbing this whole time. I remember finally giving up after crying and having tears and snot coming out of my nose, running up to this kind-looking lady who actually looked a lot like a TV character from my grandma's favorite show. But she totally helped me and calmed me down and even helped me find my mom, dad, and uncle. They were also worried and looking around for me at the same time. In the end, everything was fine and everyone was glad that we were all safe. However, the point of this silly little story is that when I lied to get my own way to try to leave that store, that's when the trouble started. I was totally fine where I was in the boring suit store, but I wanted to go my own way. All that panic and freaking out was because I wanted to do what I wanted to do. Now, this is similar to what we saw with the skit today. And it's also similar to our story today from the Bible. But our story, obviously, from the Bible is a lot more important and a lot more serious, actually. It actually changed the course of the entire world. Our story comes from the book of Genesis, the beginning of the Bible and the beginning of, well, everything. You see, in the very beginning, when God created the world, He made the first people. He made human beings, man and woman, named Adam and Eve. He made them in His own image, and He formed them using the dust of the ground together, breathing into it the breath of life. God took nothing and made it something wonderful. God spoke to Adam and Eve and told them to enjoy everything that He had created. The animals, the beautiful world filled with nature in His garden, the meaningful and good, fun work to take care of all this creation and to reflect God's goodness and greatness. It was beautiful. It was perfect. Now, God made it clear to Adam and Eve that there were two trees in the middle of the garden. One was the tree of life. It was good and wonderful to eat from, just like the rest of the trees. And the other tree, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, well, that was the only tree from which they weren't allowed to eat. If they ate of this tree, they would surely die. Now, one day, a deceitful, lying serpent, who was actually Satan, which means enemy or adversary, the one who hated God and wanted to wage war against Him. This serpent, he approached Eve and asked her a question. Did God really say you couldn't eat of any of the fruit here in this garden? Well, Eve, she responded, no, God told us the tree in the middle of the garden, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, that's the one that we aren't allowed to eat from. We can't even touch it or we'll die. Now that serpent lied to Eve. You won't die. God knows that as soon as you eat from the tree, your eyes will be opened and you'll become just like him. You'll be able to determine what is right and wrong for yourselves." Now Eve thought. She looked at that delicious fruit, contemplating, wondering her decision in her mind and in her heart. In the end, she believed the lies of the serpent over the words of the good and perfect God. She grabbed some of that fruit and she ate it. She gave some to Adam, who was right there the whole time with her, who ate it as well. And at that moment, their eyes were opened and they were flooded with guilt and shame. All of a sudden, that joyful freedom they had, not needing anything, not even clothes for warmth or protection or privacy, that was all gone. They quickly tied fig leaves together to try to cover themselves up. They had rebelled and chosen to live outside the good reign of God, and they experienced the disastrous effects of that choice. They now thought it best to hide, to run away when God came to greet them. You see, they chose to disobey and reject God, and the Bible calls this sin. When Adam and Eve sinned by eating the fruit God told them not to eat, they basically told God that they didn't want him in charge anymore. They wanted to do their own thing and follow their own way. Now, since God is good and fair, he cannot allow injustice or rebellion. He can't allow any sins to be unpunished. Just like a good and fair judge needs to give punishments to people who commit crimes or somebody who breaks laws. God's good and perfect presence just cannot mix with sin. So they had to be sent out of the garden. And that closeness that they once enjoyed, that was lost. Now, God knew that his good and perfect creation would be drastically different because of their choice to live outside of his goodness. They would be subject to sickness, pain, suffering, and even death as a result of those choices. And unfortunately, that pattern has continued to this very day. That's why we see those things in the world all around us. There's pain and sadness, unfairness, injustice, mean words being said, mean actions taking place. And for lots of people, there's a feeling of being lost because we are. And for some people, there's a feeling that the world is broken because it is. Apart from God, we are lost and broken. One man in the Bible named Habakkuk noticed that things got so bad and people got so wicked, he decided to call out to God about it. "Lord, how long do I have to call out for help? Why don't you listen to me? How long must I keep telling you that the things are terrible? Why don't you save us? Why do you make me watch while people treat others so unfairly? Why do you put up with the wrong things they are doing? I have to look at death. People are harming others. They are arguing and fighting all the time. The law can't do what it's supposed to do. Fairness never comes out on top. Sinful people surround those who do what is right, so people are never treated fairly." Now, that was a passage from Habakkuk 1, and it sounds like our world today. I mean, it was true back then, and the situation was different, but there are some similarities. However, don't worry, God gave Habakkuk a good and hopeful answer, and he gives us a message of hope too. Now, of course, there are also moments of goodness in our world around us right now. It's not entirely ugly. We see it in beautiful sunsets or moments when we talk and laugh and enjoy time with the people we love. We see it in the gorgeous mountains, the sky, and the sea. We see a hint of what things were like before with God's good and perfect design. And so there is still hope because there is still a way to get back to that wonderful place where God is king and everything is the way it ought to be, without sickness, without pain, without death, or any of the other things that come along with sin. God gave a message that someone will come to make all those wrong things right. Someone who will defeat the serpent and the lies and sin that has infected in our hearts. Because the world may be broken, but there is still hope that it can and will be fixed. In fact, we are going to see how this journey into the unknown actually leads us to God's promise for something better and wonderful. Now, in the middle of God's punishments to Adam and Eve, he also gave us a message that Satan would be finished once and for all, even though it seems like he was the winner. This is from Genesis, and this is God telling Satan, her son will crush your head, and you will bite his heel. You see, this verse is telling us that God had a plan. Someone many years later would crush the head of Satan, defeating him, even though Satan bites his heel with a seemingly deadly blow. Strange verse, perhaps, but it serves as a reminder that although our problems may seem huge, that the world is broken and that we are lost because of sin, God has something even bigger and better planned, something that gives us hope. So be sure to check out our other activity videos that talk about these things further. Have a chat with the people around you. Have you experienced sin and the bad stuff that comes along with it? Have you ever experienced, on the flip side, the wonder and awesomeness of God by noticing the creation that He made? Have a chat, and be sure to share what you've been doing on our Instagram or email us your photos because we would love to have you featured in our next video. Bye for now, and we'll see you next week.